going to talk to you today about pepper. Pepper is one of the most ancient of spices. It's been traded for thousands of years. It originated from the southern part of India, and pepper is a spice that has been a very valuable commodity. It's often been used as a currency, and it comes from a vine that is called the Piper nigrum vine. Now, there are a number of interesting things about pepper besides its incredible history. The early days of the spice trade were really driven by the market for pepper. And of course today everyone has pepper available to them, but going back 2 or 3 centuries, pepper was a very valuable commodity, and people, the average person, wouldn't be able to get hold of it. You may have heard the term a peppercorn rent, which today means a very cheap rent, one where the rent's very economical and so you don't charge someone very much. But in 12th century England, it actually meant exactly the opposite, where some landlords would demand that rents were actually paid in peppercorns rather than the coin of the realm, because peppercorns were so valuable. So what is it about this mystical spice that makes it so attractive, and where does it actually come from? As I mentioned, it comes from the Piper nigrum vine. This is a vine that's native to the south of India, and it is generally trellised up palm trees. It's the conventional way of growing it. What forms on the pepper vine is a little cluster of berries that we refer to as a spike. And this little spike of berries forms after the pepper has flowered. The flowering is pollinated by the monsoon rains, and it's the rain running over the flowers that actually fertilizes them. And then these little berries form. The little green peppercorns on the spike are then harvested at that stage when they're green. They're then put out on woven mats in the sunshine, where they will dry during the tropical sun, and they're often left out for around about a week to 10 days. During that time, an enzyme that actually occurs in the skin of the peppercorn, the bit we technically call the pericarp, the enzyme that is in there turns the peppercorn black, and it creates a volatile oil that is called piperin. So when you have black pepper, and you'll notice that the berries are extremely dark, and when you smell it, you'll find that the aroma is almost quite oily, and the oiliness that you're smelling is the piperin oil that is being formed as part of the drying process. So, I suppose you may be wondering now where white pepper comes from. White peppercorns are very different in flavour to black. The white peppercorns are produced by harvesting peppercorns when they are nearly ripe. So a lot of them will have turned yellow, and some may have even turned pink. They're harvested and then they're soaked in water for approximately 2 weeks. After this soaking period, they're taken out of the water, they're macerated to rub off the outer skin, the bit we call the pericarp, that contains the enzyme. That's rubbed off, and then the peppercorns are dried in the sun. Now, because the enzyme containing skin has been removed, the peppercorns don't turn black, because you don't have that enzyme anymore. And that's what gives you white pepper. White pepper has a completely different flavour to black pepper because it lacks the piperin oil, and also white pepper is hotter than black pepper. A white peppercorn is literally the heart of a peppercorn. Now, what about green peppercorns? For many years you could only buy green peppercorns in brine, and that was because putting the peppercorns into brine inhibited the enzyme reaction and kept them green. Now, the Indians, being very clever, worked out about 20 years ago that if you took green peppercorns and boiled them for 20 minutes, that boiling process would kill the enzyme and the pepper could then be dried. And that's why we can now see what we call dried green peppercorns. These are the ones that are ideal for putting in a pepper mill. They're reasonably firm and they grind up quite well. With modern technology, they've also discovered that they can freeze dry green peppercorns. And a freeze-dried green peppercorn is beautifully plump, has a lovely fresh green pepper flavour. It is a little bit hotter than black, but it's not quite as hot as white. And the freeze-dried green peppercorns can be used in all those recipes that call for peppercorns in brine. I like to use them because the fact that they haven't been put in brine means that they don't have that quite extreme saltiness, so you just get the really good pepper flavour. Then, to create a little bit of confusion, we have pink peppercorns. Now, true pink peppercorns for many years you could only ever buy in brine, and that's because the right pink peppercorn had to be put into brine to inhibit the enzyme reaction so it wouldn't turn black, otherwise it'd just look like a black peppercorn. And this is a process that has been done for many years, and mostly true pink peppercorns can only be purchased in brine. However, you will notice a lovely looking bright pink pepper which is often sold and labelled as pink pepper. Strictly speaking, it should be called pink Shyness pepper. And the reason for this is that this does not come from the pepper vine at all. It comes from a tree called Shyness terebinthifolius. A lot of people think that the so-called pepper tree that you see growing in many parts of Australia and also Brazil, because it is a native of Brazil, a lot of people think that is the peppercorn tree that gives these pink peppercorns. It's not the case. That particular tree has the botanical name of Shyness molle or Shyness aurea. You'll notice that the leaves are very frond-like and it has these little pink berries. Those pink berries do have a mild toxicity and it is not recommended to eat them. Cubeb pepper or tailed pepper. This pepper is very interesting because it has a little tail on it. It has a very different flavour to normal pepper, and from time to time, believe it or not, the sale of cubebs has actually been banned. And it hasn't been banned for any wonderful exotic reason. It's simply been banned because from time to time the spice traders have been concerned about cubeb pepper being used to adulterate real pepper. And so various bans have been put on it over the centuries. But it is quite readily available now. The lovely thing about cubebs is that they also, a little bit like the Shyness pepper, cubebs have a quite distinct pine-like note to them. And for that reason, they're very good with food that is quite rich, and they're good with things like pork. And you'll also find cubebs being used quite a lot in Indonesian cooking, because a lot of cubeb pepper grows in the Indonesian spice islands. And last but not least in the pepper family, we have long pepper. There are two varieties of long pepper. The one that is grown in India has the botanical name of Piper longum, very original sort of name to give it, and the one that grows in the Indonesian spice islands is the Piper retrofractum. The interesting thing about long pepper is that it looks nothing like pepper at all, and you'll notice that these little you can't really call them peppercorns, these pieces of pepper look a little bit like a very small male pine cone. They are long in shape and they have a very unusual fragrance. You could probably describe the fragrance of long pepper as being somewhat floral, maybe almost a little bit musky. If you're making something like an Indonesian rendang, a little bit of long pepper in that will give it a truly authentic flavour. You can use long pepper whole. You can just put that into the dish while it's cooking, and then when it's finished cooking, you just take out the long pepper and the flavour will have infused into the dish. The other thing you can always do if you're making a curry is to crush up the long pepper and just add it along with the other spices that you're using. So the world of pepper, quite a fascinating one. Next time you just take a little bit of pepper and you put it onto a dish, think of the amazing history that it has and all the various uses that it can be put to.